Friedrich Nietzsche was one of the most provocative and challenging philosophers of all time. His ideas shook the very foundations of the beliefs, values, and conventions that had sustained Western civilization for centuries. Among all his teachings, there is one in particular considered the most dangerous. Not because it is difficult to understand, but because it directly confronts everything we have been conditioned to accept as truth. This teaching calls into question the meaning of morality, truth, and even human existence itself. What if everything you've always believed to be right was, in fact, just an illusionary construct? What if your worldview was completely mistaken? In this video, we will dive into Nietzsche's most unsettling idea, a truth so uncomfortable that it is still rejected by many today. To understand it, we must first explore the concept of nihilism, which was one of the foundations of his thought. Nihilism is the belief that life has no objective purpose, that all the values we follow are human inventions, and that, at its core, there is no absolute truth. This view may sound bleak and even despairing, and indeed, for many, it is. Nietzsche believed that humanity was entering a deep crisis, as old beliefs, especially religious ones, were losing their power. He called this the death of God. But this death wasn't literal. For Nietzsche, it meant the collapse of the traditional values that had upheld society for millennia. The major problem, according to him, is that humanity was unprepared to live without these certainties. If there is no God to tell us what is right or wrong, who decides? If there is no higher purpose, why do we exist? This is where Nietzsche presents his most dangerous teaching. If traditional values no longer serve us, then it is up to each individual to create their own values. But this task is far from simple. Few are willing to take on such a responsibility. The total freedom to define one's own path carries a tremendous weight. This is where the figure of the last man arises, someone who, when faced with freedom, chooses mediocrity. A being who flees from the responsibility of creating meaning and settles for comfort, routine, and safety. In contrast, Nietzsche proposes the ideal of the Übermensch, or Overman, the Superman, someone capable of transcending inherited morality and living according to their own will and principles. This new kind of human being does not submit to external rules. He lives authentically, guided by his own inner strength. But this idea is dangerous because it threatens the very structure of society. After all, if everyone were to follow only their own morality, what would be left of the established order? Nietzsche knew that few would have the courage to walk this path, and therein lies the real dilemma. Are you willing to abandon your certainties and build your own truth? Or do you prefer to cling to comforting beliefs, even if they are based on illusions? This is Nietzsche's boldest provocation, and the one few have the courage to face. But what if he's right? What happens to those who choose to follow this path? Keep watching, because we're going to dive even deeper into this reflection and explore how it can completely transform the way you live. But after all, what does it actually mean to create your own values? And how does that impact our way of living? Nietzsche warns us, most people prefer to cling to ready-made truths because facing uncertainty requires courage. From a young age, we are taught to obey rules, follow norms, and seek the approval of others. But what if all of that is just a construction? Nietzsche's most dangerous teaching suggests exactly this. There is no universal moral code. It is up to each person to find their own direction. This doesn't mean acting irresponsibly. It means abandoning unquestioned dogmas and inherited beliefs, and having the boldness to live an authentic and truthful life. The great challenge in Nietzsche's vision is that it requires a deep level of maturity and self-knowledge. When he speaks about the transition from the last man to the overman, he's not merely describing a change in behavior, but a true inner revolution. The last man represents someone who is content with immediate pleasures, who seeks comfort and avoids facing deeper existential questions. The overman, on the other hand, is the one who faces the chaos of existence with courage and becomes the author of his own destiny. However, this path is anything but simple. It requires a kind of symbolic death. One must abandon inherited truths and be reborn as someone truly free. This is where one of Nietzsche's core concepts enters: the will to power. To him, life has no preordained meaning. It is we who give it meaning by affirming our own existence. The will to power is the force that drives us to create, overcome challenges, and transform the world around us. Yet this vital impulse is often stifled by fear, insecurity, and the pressure of external values dictating how we should live. And that's where most people fail. Instead of seeking their own truth, they choose to conform to what society expects. They remain trapped in jobs they hate, follow standards they don't understand, and live lives that deep down aren't truly theirs. Nietzsche saw this as a new form of slavery, a silent and voluntary submission to ideals that were never truly questioned. Freeing oneself from this prison requires a radical process of deconstruction, breaking away from all the certainties imposed since childhood. But can just anyone handle that kind of freedom? For Nietzsche, only strong spirits can bear the weight of this responsibility without falling into despair. One of the greatest dangers along this path is precisely nihilism. When we realize the old values no longer hold, we can fall into existential emptiness and believe that nothing has meaning. Nietzsche warned of this risk. For him, the destruction of old values should not be the end of the process, but the beginning. The next step would be the creation of new values, genuine ones aligned with the essence of each individual. And this is where the big questions emerge. If truth is not fixed, how do we know we are on the right path? This doubt marks the dividing line between those who merely reject the world and those who truly build something new. Many see Nietzsche as a thinker of chaos and destruction, but in truth, what he proposed was a profound process of transformation. He understood that tearing down beliefs without offering alternatives could lead to total collapse. That's why he argued that the overman should be a creator, someone who builds his own reality based on his experience, will, and unique vision of the world. But how far can this idea take us? Can we really live without universal values? Or is there something, perhaps invisible, unconscious, that continues to guide us even when we believe we are free? This is one of the most provocative questions that arise from Nietzsche's vision. And now let's explore how this perspective can be applied to real life, along with the dangers and rewards that accompany such a choice. If we accept the idea that traditional values are not absolute, and that it is up to us to create our own principles, a new question inevitably arises. How do we know if we are on the right path? Nietzsche does not give us a definitive answer, and perhaps it is precisely this lack of ready-made answers that makes his philosophy so challenging. For him, the search for truth is not a destination, but a process, a human, mutable, and subjective process. Still, there is a subtle criterion Nietzsche suggests: the intensity of life. But what does that mean? It means that an authentic value is not one that weakens us, represses us, or traps us, but one that makes us feel more alive. It is something that expands our vital energy, that gives us the courage to face existence head-on. A true value, according to this logic, is one that connects us to our own power to create, to act, to transform. Truth, then, ceases to be a fixed block of certainties and becomes a flowing river, something that evolves as we grow, change, and mature. And that takes courage, because unlike the comfort of pre-made rules, this path places us before a dizzying freedom. This is where one of the most dangerous aspects of Nietzschean thought lies. It offers no safety. Most people prefer certainties. They want someone to tell them what is right or wrong, what they should do, which path to follow. Nietzsche, however, tears that veil and transfers the responsibility for life to the individual. This means there is no one to blame. There is no predetermined destiny, no ultimate truth to bring consolation. There is only the individual facing chaos, with their own strength to create meaning. But how do we do that without falling into the void? Nietzsche recognized the real danger of nihilism. When we realize that everything we've inherited, beliefs, rules, customs, can be questioned, it's easy to fall into an existential abyss. Many, upon realizing this, enter a state of apathy, of total demotivation. This is the trap of passive nihilism, when the absence of meaning paralyzes instead of liberating. For Nietzsche, this was the greatest challenge of the modern world. The destruction of old values was, according to him, inevitable, but few would be able to take the next step, to create new values from their own essence. And this is where the concept of the Übermensch, the Superman, comes in. The Übermensch is not just someone who rejects the old, he is someone who has enough strength to generate something new. He does not surrender to cynicism, he does not isolate himself in despair. On the contrary, he affirms life with all its pain, uncertainty, and contradictions. He accepts chaos as raw material and finds in the very act of creation, even in the midst of darkness, a reason to keep going. To live, for the Übermensch, is not to obey imposed rules, but to reinvent oneself constantly. It is a process of deep experimentation, of daily construction of one's own meaning. And that is precisely what frightens us, because this path demands a strength of spirit that not everyone is willing to cultivate. It means walking a path that no one has paved before, where each step must be invented. It is lonely, it is challenging, but it is also profoundly liberating. When Nietzsche speaks of the death of God, he is not merely criticizing institutionalized religion. He is revealing the absence of any metaphysical structure that can tell us, with authority, how we should live. And without that absolute reference, many will feel lost. But it is precisely in that moment of crisis, in that vacuum of meaning, that the possibility of something new is born. The big question is, are we truly ready for freedom? Or do we prefer to remain within the comforting illusions we know so well? If we choose to accept Nietzsche's most challenging teaching, we must relinquish many certainties, face our own fears, and assume full responsibility for our choices. However, if we reject this proposal, we are merely adapting to a world we did not create, obeying rules we rarely question. Nietzsche warns us of the dangers of nihilism. But how can we escape this trap? What separates those who surrender to the void from those who go further and create new values? The answer lies in the concept of the will to power. For Nietzsche, this will is not merely a desire for political or material dominance. It represents the creative life force, the impulse that drives us to grow, to surpass ourselves, and to transform the world. Yet this force does not manifest in the same way for everyone. Many, when faced with the absence of absolute truths, fall into crisis and seek comfort in new forms of dogmatism. This is what Nietzsche calls the last man, someone who avoids freedom, choosing instead a safe life without major challenges, guided only by comfort and immediate pleasure. The last man fears uncertainty and becomes complacent, living passively and following imposed norms without reflection. In contrast, those who confront the abyss of existence without retreat and emerge stronger, these are the creators, the authors of their own being. But this path is risky. It demands a deep confrontation with the unconscious, with our fears, traumas, and shadows. Here, Nietzsche connects with Jung. Jung developed the concept of the shadow, representing the repressed and unacknowledged aspects of our psyche, desires, impulses, and vulnerabilities we prefer to ignore. Facing this shadow is essential to integrate who we truly are and awaken our most authentic potential. The relationship between Nietzsche and Jung is fascinating. While Nietzsche announces the collapse of old values, Jung offers a path to rebuild meaning from within. However, this journey requires courage and self-awareness. It requires us to confront our contradictions and to stop looking for ready-made answers outside ourselves. This is Nietzsche's true challenge. He demands a level of psychic maturity that few are prepared to develop. And this leads us to an even deeper question. If traditional values are not absolute, and it is up to us to create our own, what prevents everyone from living however they please? This is a common criticism of Nietzsche's philosophy. Many interpret him as a defender of moral chaos or boundless egoism. But this view is superficial. Nietzsche's proposal is not an invitation to hedonism or destruction. but rather a profound call to individual responsibility. Creating one's own values does not mean following fleeting desires, but rather building a life guided by authenticity, courage, and a constant commitment to self-development. And this is precisely where his philosophy becomes most radical. Nietzsche proposes an ethics based on greatness, not on traditional morality. For him, what matters is not obeying externally imposed rules, but living in a way that makes one great, in the deepest and most transformative sense of the word. This implies making choices that strengthen us, that make us more whole and alive. Yet this strength has nothing to do with brutality or domination over others. On the contrary, it is expressed in the capacity to create, to transform, and to inspire. Few are willing to accept this calling, the idea that there is no given purpose, no ready-made path to follow, and that each person must forge their own existence with their own hands. This is a dangerous idea because it dismantles all illusions of security and confronts us with the raw reality of freedom. Freedom, after all, has its price. And the pressing question is, are we willing to carry that weight, or do we prefer to take refuge in comforting beliefs? The answer to this question not only determines the course of our personal lives, but also shapes the future of humanity as a whole. Would you like this text adapted into a script format or narrated style for a video? If the radical freedom proposed by Nietzsche comes with a price, what would that price be? The answer is clear: the solitude that accompanies absolute responsibility. When we leave behind the idea of a predefined meaning, no one remains to dictate how we must live. There is no universal morality, nor a preordained destiny. What exists instead is an open field where every step depends entirely on our choices. And that precisely is what frightens so many people. For Nietzsche, true greatness cannot exist without pain. It is in confronting this pain that the Creator is revealed, the one who, even in the face of emptiness, chooses to continue, to build and to bloom. Becoming a creator of values is a solitary journey because it demands breaking free from psychological dependence on external systems of meaning. That's why Nietzsche spoke of the path of the most difficult, a route where many give up, unable to bear the weight of deciding for themselves what it means to live an authentic life. And this brings us to an essential question: what differentiates those who succumb to nihilism from those who transcend and become great? The answer lies in the capacity to affirm life. For Nietzsche, true strength is not only in resisting chaos, but in learning to dance over it. It's more than accepting the absence of absolute truths. It's about embracing it with creativity, courage, and enthusiasm. This is where one of the central concepts of Nietzsche's philosophy comes in: the eternal return. Imagine that you were condemned to relive your life exactly as it is, repeating every choice, every mistake, every pain, and every joy eternally. If this idea causes you anguish, it may be because you are not yet living a life worthy of being repeated. But if you can look at your journey and say, yes, I would live it all again, then you have reached what Nietzsche called amor fati, the love of fate. Amor fati is not passive resignation, but a passionate acceptance of everything life brings, including suffering. It's about taking full responsibility for every decision, every stumble, every pain, recognizing that all of it is part of the process of becoming who you are. This is perhaps the most provocative and transformative point of Nietzsche's thought: the notion that suffering is not a mistake to be avoided, but an essential ingredient of growth. In a world that values comfort, instant gratification, and the avoidance of discomfort, Nietzsche stands as an uncomfortable and deeply truthful voice, reminding us that true greatness comes from overcoming. But what does this mean in practice? How do we live this philosophy? The first step is to abandon the victim mentality. Nietzsche despised the attitude of those who blame the world or others for their failures. For him, this posture was a sign of weakness. The truly strong spirit faces reality head-on, without excuses, without blame, without walls to hide behind. The second step is to transform suffering into creative power. It's not about romanticizing pain, but recognizing that it can be raw material for transformation. Those who can use their pain as an impulse to reinvent themselves are, for Nietzsche, the true free spirits. And the third step is to develop the instinct of affirmation. Instead of wishing life were different, the strong spirit sees it as a vast field of possibilities. He doesn't expect perfection, nor a life without challenges. He wants only to live it all with intensity, fully, deeply, truly. But the big question still hangs in the air. Are we truly prepared for this? Confronting the journey proposed by Nietzsche means diving into a direct confrontation with reality. It involves abandoning comfortable certainties, facing hard truths, and above all, accepting the world as it is, without filters, without illusions. And the inevitable question arises, are we ready for this? Do we have enough strength to bear the weight of this absolute freedom? Would you like to expand on any of these steps or explore practical applications for these ideas?